Meccano, part number M52 from the 1939 Army Mechanised Constructor set. Hi folks and welcome back. It's another aeroplane build to delve into history, just in case you hadn't guessed. And this build is a little different, as the Parasol monoplane is an unusual design, trying to solve a number of problems, the biggest of which is the view the pilot has. The Parasol is an aircraft where the fuselage is suspended below the wing, either by a pylon or cabin struts. Cabin struts are the shorter uprights that carry the wing above the body. In most cases, they also need lift struts that connect a point on the wing to the fuselage. And when I started to research this aircraft, as always, I started with the referenced example aircraft, the Parnell Parasol, which I wasn't all that interested in. After all, it was a build run of 2 airframes and was designed for testing. But then I realised what it was I stumbled into, and right now I'm like a terrier with too many choices. I don't know which one to go for, because the Parasol aircraft includes a number of my favourite aircrafts. Ones that I've always been in love with, like the Dornier Do 24 flying boat and the PBY-4 Catalina. Then there's the science behind it, the engineering that had to be put in place, things that had to be built, made, designed, on the back of a fag packet with a mug of tea in hand and a rolly cigarette stuck behind your ear. This is proper engineering, folks. Back in the day when we made things, big things, that did things. Okay, time for a mug of tea, sit in a darkened room and calm down. Right, that's better. Going back to the design of the Parasol, it's easy to get confused between the 3 types of high wing design. There is the high wing, where the wing box is connected to the top of the aircraft. Any number of military designs show this configuration. There is the shoulder wing, where the wing attaches to the highest part of the fuselage, and in large aircraft there is little to no difference between the 2 designs. But in smaller, lighter aircraft, the 2 designs are very different aircraft and offer different benefits. And then the Parasol, where the fuselage, as mentioned before, is suspended under the wing. This allows for great pilot's visibility, and like the shoulder-mounted wing, makes the aircraft great for military observation roles. One of the biggest benefits to the high wing is the reduced ground effect on landing, greatly reducing the tendency to float and giving a shorter runway requirement. Conversely, the low wing has a much shorter takeoff length because of ground effect. The Parnell Aircraft Company didn't at first strike me as an interesting topic until you start to read into what they did and who they were. Originally starting off in 1820 as weights, shop and ship fitters, they were based in Bristol. The company was the largest shop fitters in England by 1880, quoted as, "There was hardly a city or town in Great Britain where their productions were not known and greatly appreciated." In 1916, during the First World War, they got into aircraft production, which makes sense, seeing as they were well established and well equipped cabinet builders with nearly 100 years' experience. By the late 1920s, while aircraft design was beginning to leap ahead with both new designs and better quality engines, there was one major problem, and that was the scientific study of aerodynamics on full-scale aircraft. You would think this was a simple case of putting the aircraft into a wind tunnel and study the data, and that's where we run into difficulties. There was only one wind tunnel capable of taking full-size propellers, and only one high-pressure wind tunnel capable of giving realistic Reynolds numbers, and both of them were in America. So how did you test aircraft? You built them, you flew them, and at some point people died in crashes because of some reason that hadn't been seen before, as we pushed against the edge of the envelope and reached for things that were outside of our grasp due to new aeronautical physics. Because less than 100 years before, the idea of travelling at speed was unheard of. My great uncle, John Godfrey Parry Thomas, was told that he wouldn't be able to travel at over 150 miles per hour because the human body was unable to withstand the pressures exerted on it. And when he met his death by rolling Babs on Pendine Beach in Wales on that fateful day in 1927, it wasn't the air pressure that killed him as he reached over 180 miles per hour, but the force of the impact as the car disintegrated during the crash. The smaller wind tunnels in Britain could only test scale model aircraft, and there's a problem as you scale the maths up to full size. It is simply a case of the physics and maths don't always scale at the same rate, and as the Reynolds numbers might seem to correlate sometimes, there are other things happening that the scale model doesn't show, or we couldn't see in the scale model tests. But what are these magical numbers? Reynolds numbers are a branch of fluid mechanics and part of engineering that we all see every day in our day-to-day life. I can guarantee you that you've looked at this problem at least once today. Reynolds numbers show the transition between a laminar flow and a turbulent flow in any form of fluids. And when air is under pressure, it becomes a fluid. Put it under too much pressure and it becomes a solid. We see it when we run water out of a tap. The laminar flow is the gentle flow of water that fills our glass. The turbulent flow is the one that makes sure you're soaked, normally just having been to the bathroom, and now you look like you had an accident and didn't make it to the toilet on time. George Stokes was one of the first persons to start studying this in 1851, but the real work was done by Osborne Reynolds in 1883. And why was this important? Shipping was one, as a turbulent flow can create cavitation, which will eat your ship's propeller, and also how the bow and stern of the ship affect the water as it flows alongside the hull, and the wake created at the stern. There was also an effect with steam engines, getting a better flow of water to the engine, and a better flow of steam from the engine. For aircraft, as air is compressed, especially at high speeds, verging on the speed of sound, there is a wall of solid air in front of the aircraft which has to be penetrated. This creates one of the two sonic booms that occur at high speed. The second is when the air comes back together after the aircraft has passed through it. In fact, at this point, the aircraft isn't so much travelling through air as we know it, but is travelling through a pocket of unstable air created by the shock wave that is caused by supersonic travel. And if it wasn't for Stokes and Reynolds' work in the early fluid mechanics nearly 200 years ago, we wouldn't have as good an understanding of the effects of high speed in any fluid. If you get that pocket of air wrong, if your maths isn't correct, people die. This is one of the things that wind tunnels help to show us, and why they're vital in the testing of all high-speed vehicles, not just aircraft. Of all the Powersol aircraft that I've known of, the Dornier flying boat and the PBY-4 Catalina have been some of my favourite. There's something about the aircraft that I just love. Maybe coming from a long love of building model kits or a love of history, these few selected aircraft land in my list of perfect designs. The Dornier Do 24 was a three-engined aircraft used for maritime patrol and search and rescue, used by the Dutch Navy. But of all the German designed and built aircraft, it is the Dornier 24 that strangely has seen the most service in any other armed forces, as the Dornier 24 was employed post-World War II by the French, Norwegian, Soviet and Spanish navies, and during the conflict with Sweden and even Australia, and would carry on its primary role of search and rescue until the late 1960s with the Spanish Air Force. With nearly 300 being built, it is an aircraft that I've always loved the look of. But the PBY-4 Catalina, the American version of the same role requirement, had a production run of nearly 4,000 airframes and was retired in the early 1980s when its last military operator, the Brazilian Air Force, finally allowed the old lady to rest. And there were only 2 years between the first flights, with the Catalina being the first to take to the air in 1935. The term PBY comes from the Naval Aircraft Designation System of 1922, the P standing for patrol, the B meaning bomber, and the Y being the code for the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. With the 620 aircraft being built in Canada during World War II by Canadian Vickers, were the PBV-4s, and Boeing Canada were the PB-2B-4s. It was the RAF that named the aircraft Catalina, and soon the name stuck with everybody else. And here we are at the end of another build, and as always, this is a set I really love. Probably of all the Meccano I own, this box always has an almost magical Christmas feel when I open the box. It's housed in an old 1930s wooden Outfit number 5 box. It's funny to think that both box and parts are nearly 100 years old, and that post-World War II, this set would disappear from the catalogues of available outfits.